remind members that this meeting will be recorded, and ask that the IT now, switch that the recording technology on. That's us. Yeah, go there. Okay. If members that are joining us remotely, just remember to keep your mics off when you're not speaking. Okay, we're getting a wee bit of feedback there. I think it's okay now. Thanks, John. And now call for the session, and Christine will go round the members just now.
Yep, thanks, Chair. As we still have at least one elected member joining remotely, I'll just call the sedering. So we have Councillor Douglas Street.
Here.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Here.
Councillor John McFadden. Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Here.
Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Present.
Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Here.
Councillor Barry Douglas.
Here.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Here.
Councillor Claire Maitland. Here. Councillor Drew Filson.
Here.
And do we have Babs Mowat? No, not yet. I have an apology from Alan Vint and an apology from Ian Pettigrew and Jackie Livingston. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, and can I just mention to members, we also have Councillor Graham Boyd with us this morning. Graham would like to ask a question on the East Ayrshire performance at the capital programme section. So we'll allow Graham in for that. Due notice was served in the normal way. There's now declaration of interest. I know that the Leisure Trust folk and amongst others. So capture that. That's Jackie, Ian, Christine, Claire. Christine's doing it.
I know.
Anyone else? Okay. Is there any other declarations of interest? Okay. Now going to the main report this morning. I think it will be East Ayrshire Performance, and Joe McLaughlin's going to take us through it. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This is the East Ayrshire Performance Report. It's the report that provides Cabinet and Governance and Scrutiny colleagues with an overview of the financial performance of the Council, then breaks into other relevant performance indicators, and grateful to colleagues who are here today and who will take us through the relevant sections as we reach them. The report before you today is the report that captures the finance story of the Council for the 2021-2022 financial year. And it's worth noting that when telling that story that I take members back to the budget report, which has been circulated to all members, but which, when it was presented to Cabinet in February, highlighted three things in terms of our finances. It noted that the Council's core budget remains under incredible pressure because of the ring fencing and the protections offered to specific elements of services. It highlighted that in a year of COVID, when we received £31 million to fight COVID for our businesses and our communities, that because of the receipt of that COVID funding, that the Council was likely to end the year with an underspend. And I mentioned that to members in February, and the report before you today confirms that position, that uniquely and perversely to some extent, the services across the Council ended the year with an underspend. I'll touch on that shortly. And the third point was just making a nod to the year we're in, the 2022-23 financial year, when we were learning to live with COVID and at the same time seeing new and much larger pressures coming to bear, particularly around inflation and the cost of living. So, members, to take you to paragraph 7 of the report before you, this provides an overview in that table of the very, very high level position of the Council. It shows a break-even position for the Council, and you can see in the far right column, the bracket indicates an underspend, and you can see that underspend for all elements of the Council. In this report, I seek approval today to make some transfers, as is normally the case at year end. But we begin by noting that the Council's General Fund uncommitted balance, that money that we are required to set aside somewhere between 2% and 4% of our net revenue expenditure, currently sits at £9.2 million or 2.6% of our net revenue expenditure. It's towards the lower end of that spectrum. And as your Chief Financial Officer, it's my view that that is exactly too low. And I would wish that to be higher as we prepare to take forward the Council into the new pressures that are bearing down on us and down on our communities. Paragraph 8 says that year-end break-even position is after setting aside a sum to support contractual obligations in respect of the new waste contract that was let. In addition to that, in recognising the pressures on households and taking the views from the cross-party sounding board, we also asked Cabinet today to set aside £384,000 to add to the fund we have for the cost of living balance, to take that balance up to £1.5 million. Some members will recall that this was a grant that we received from Scottish Government towards the end of the financial year, and Cabinet elected to use some of that money to set aside and to put out funding for specific groups. That balance, if approved, up to £1.5 million, will see a report coming towards Cabinet from officers seeking recommendations and approval to use that balance to provide that continued support to our communities. And at the same time, recognising that when we set the budget in February, we understood and believed there was to be an energy price cap review in April and possibly another one in October. What we do know is that the April one was in excess of 40%. The October one, we are informed, is likely to be around 40%. And we now have notification that it is likely that the regulator will allow the 6-monthly price cap review to be moved to 3-monthly, recognising the pressures that's putting on the sustainability of energy providing companies. So we're now seeing a potential energy price cap in January 2023. And so the report before you today asks you to set aside £880,000 to help safeguard the Council and its services, those vital services in schools and elsewhere, to meet our own energy bills, as we do with that £1.5 million for cost of living, to help others deal with their pressures too. Paragraph 9 notes that during the year, as is normally the case, there are transfers in and out of various reserves. £245,000 was transferred out of repairs and renewals and passed to specific services. And we seek approval from Cabinet today to add a further £400,000 into that fund for a range of purposes, but also to set aside an allocation for our head of Ayrshire Roads Alliance to deal with issues around ash trees and the ash dieback disease. And Kevin will provide a report on that in due course. And finally, members, at the bottom of paragraph 9, we note that at period 7 last year and the second East Ayrshire performance of this year, we reprofiled our capital programme from that year into this. And when that reprofiling takes place, the money we set aside to pay for that debt also reprofiles. And so you're seeing at the bottom of paragraph 9 that £1.244 million that we haven't spent in debt charges, and approval to set that aside and put it into the Council's capital fund in order to pay that debt when it materialises. As is normally the case, members, when the budget is set by full Council in February, the savings or cuts that are agreed at that meeting are then tracked by colleagues in Finance and ICT to ensure that our budget remains balanced throughout the year. And so in paragraph 10, we note 2 options that were approved. They are immaterial in terms of general scale of size in relation to the Council's budget. They rest within facilities and property management. One is amber, one is red. They have not been met in the years in question, but the head of facilities and property management has taken effective alternative actions to bring his budget back into balance, taking account of other underspends within his service. Members, paragraph 11 is when we begin to talk about COVID and the COVID grants. And like all other councils, we received a range of COVID grants. We received £88 million of COVID grants the year before last, and we received £31 million of COVID grants last year. Those grants break down into three types. There are grants that are awarded and allocated for a specific purpose, which we can place to a specific service. So in the table in paragraph 12, we have service-specific grants of £1.689 million. They are specific to a service because they are, for example, for the education service to aid education recovery and to facilitate remote learning. There are also some COVID grants we receive that it's hard to pin down where exactly they should be placed because they hit a number of services. And so that non-service specific allocation of 3.374 is for financial insecurity. So this is a grant we receive that can be dealt with. It can help people with rent arrears, council tax arrears. It can help stop food larders, and so it begins to hit a range of services. And there'll be a report brought back to Cabinet in due course allocating that funds. And on that other one, we also see a grant for logistics, COVID logistics, again, which splits across various services. The discretionary grant of 6.381, again, the table below just shows the story of that grant. In March 2021, we received £14.293 million from the Scottish Government for our battle and our fight against COVID. It had no strings attached. It was for elected members in East Ayrshire and for Cabinet to approve its use. At the first East Ayrshire Performance Report in August last year, I came to Cabinet and sought approval to use £1.973 million of that fund to help services who were experiencing real financial hardship from the additional costs that they had to incur, particularly, for example, in waste, where they had to restrict the number of operatives in wagons, and they had to actually have vans running behind wagons to keep the men safe and to align with the restrictions that were in place at that time. And Council on February agreed £5.939 million to create around 200 apprenticeships, recognising that as we began to learn to live with COVID, there was an acknowledgement that some of the harms that were done across those 4 COVID harms, that the one around supporting people back into employment and back into training was a real necessity for East Ayrshire and for our communities. And that's a separate item on today's report. So there is £6.381 million set aside for this council to take forward in our ongoing fight against COVID and the impacts of COVID. And I suppose, you know, we're about to enter into, I think it's our 3rd financial year of COVID. We're still learning from COVID, and there's still some things that we don't actually know will fall out of COVID yet. And so that 6.381, although it seems like a significant sum, and indeed it is a significant sum, it's a sum of money that's to last this council for not only this year, but beyond. And so we'll bring forward proposals for that use. And you'll probably hear me speak more about that in the next East Ayrshire Performance Report, when we see how the tail of COVID is affecting some services, particularly around additional income loss or additional costs that are taking place and being felt within that service. Paragraph 16 sets out the year-end position in terms of our general fund balance. It's quite a complex set of tables. As I said to group leaders and at cross-party sounding board, colleagues in finance and ICT will be convening sessions on specific finance matters to take members, and new members particularly, through the council's finances in more detail. But essentially what those tables are telling us is that the range of services and the uncommitted balance that's in place in the council. It's important to note these tables are important because in this council, our reserve strategy allow a service that underspends at year end to carry that underspend forward into the next year's budget. And where that service overspends, then that becomes a first hit against their next year's budget. It allows proper financial planning within services, and it removes any risk of quick spend that maybe existed many, many years ago. In paragraph 19 just sets out the scene, and we'll go into this in more detail shortly, around the housing revenue account. This is a specific fund within the council. It is ring-fenced. It is the fund that is used to maintain our housing stock, and it's showing here that it ended the year with a surplus or an underspend of £2.256 million. That isn't good news, members, and I'll explain why when I go through the covering report in more detail shortly. At page 8 on your papers, at paragraph 20, we begin to touch on the capital programme. And paragraph 20 just puts down a note, a paragraph for members, making them aware that in November each year, the Head of Housing and Communities presents a number of reports to Cabinet. These reports detail the plans for housing improvements and also for house building programme. And just noting at this paragraph that the volatility that exists within the overall market at the moment means that the Head of Service is taking stock of all of those pressures and the impacts that they would have on housing rents and on our housing stock, and will report back on the outcome of that review in the Strategic Housing Investment Programme paper that will be submitted to this Cabinet in November. And before I finish, just a couple of more paragraphs in terms of paragraph 21 seeks approval to declare the former schoolhouse at Cumnock Academy surplus to requirements. And paragraph 22 just lays out a few paragraphs on the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. This is an act that allows the Council to undertake, where relevant and where necessary, covert surveillance and associated duties. There's a requirement because the Council has that power to note publicly whether or not those powers have been enacted throughout the year. For many years now, that has been a no, and they have not been enacted. And instead of a full report coming to Cabinet that essentially has so many pages saying we've never used it, we use East Ayrshire Performs the year-end report to give that indication that there have been no instances where the Chief Governance Officer has been asked to use those powers. Chair, with your approval, I'll skip to paragraph 32, conscious that colleagues and I will take members through the other parts shortly. But just on risk management, noting that, as members would expect and as Cabinet would absolutely expect, the Corporate Risk Register was reviewed by the Corporate Management team earlier this month. Members will know that from reading previous reports that colleagues across the Council, and particularly in Facilities and Property Management, are looking at a possible new risk around what's known as black start, which is the loss of the national grid and of national electricity. That is, as you could imagine, because of its complexity, is still being reviewed and will be notified back to Council in the next East Ayrshire Performance report in August. Chair, I'm conscious that I've been through that fairly quickly, and I'm happy to stop there and take any questions from members.
Thanks very much, Joe. Well, it's very much a competent report. It's a start report in terms of some of the financial outlook, ahead for us, and I think we're as well placed as any local authority in preparation for it. But I think you mentioned we're going to get a report back in terms of paragraphs 8 and 9, in terms of the cost of living crisis, a lot of which lies at the hands of Brexit, and and other policy matters are not at this level. And when I look at the energy price cap, the thought the 40% blow is big enough for people, but as we head into winter, another 40%, particularly when the energy prices certainly don't justify that. And when we look at renewable energy sector, Scotland's exporting something like 50% of its growing renewable sector. I don't see how that can be justified. So maybe at that stage, I think there's a need for us not just to accept this, although it's a national policy, it's got big implications for our community. It's probably one of the biggest risks to our community's well-being. I think we need to hope that hopefully the report will have an element where we can lobby where necessary and best prepare ourselves for the ongoing problems that our communities are going to face, particularly some of the poorest sections of our community and our businesses, in terms of the threat that this energy hike price increase represents them, which we haven't been, apart from the COVID money, we haven't been received any remuneration for. So, I mean, I think that's something we want to work with our colleagues, but lobby where we can, using our parliamentarians and wherever we can. So I'd like to see that as being part of that report. Just a matter, just that, will that be coming before the summer, Joe?
Through you, Chair. It's probably going to be after recess. So we're working it over the summer. It's we're very conscious that in the previous awards that we did very fast, operated at pace, and put out the £100 to every household where I had a child in receipt of free footwear and clothing, and we allocated £250,000 via cabinet to the financial inclusion team. But the request from members was quite clear that they wanted to try and see if they could hit specific communities of interest, and that's what officers are looking at now. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we're working on it, Chair, and we'll bring it back after recess.
No, that's fine. That seems fine to me. I think it's important we get it right. No, it's not a rush job. It's a job that we need to, do well and just make the best of what we've got and lobby hard where we need to. Jim, then Ian.
Thanks, Chair. Joe, my recollection back in March 2020, we set aside £600,000 to deal with COVID. We've been able to crystal ball the impact of COVID and the ongoing implications here. In paragraph 15, we set out beyond 21 and 22, and I'm not asking to crystal ball on it, but kind of how far beyond 21, 22 that we need to look at the 6.381?
And through you, Chair, I think it's a really good question. So the funding was awarded without any strings to deal with the aftermaths of COVID. I think in terms of some of the cost of living pressures that we're seeing, we could link them back to having a cause or having an implication that arose from COVID. The issue then becomes, when do we believe those cost of living pressures will reduce and perhaps even go away? And all the indications are, particularly from the analysis we've seen from forecasters and from economic commentators, is that that's not going to be immediate. And I think it will be alive and well in this financial year and in the next financial year too. So at this point, it's at least 2 years, Chair, but possibly longer in terms of the requirement to deal with the volatility that seems to be coming from all sides at the moment for this council and for our communities and for businesses within East Ayrshire.
Ian.
Thanks, Dougie. Thanks, Joe. Again, back to paragraph 8, Joe. The money that we set aside in the budget, yep, I think that was the right thing to do then to address the then seemed horrendous increase in energy price. But as you rightly point out, we could be facing the same again in October, then a further 20% in January of next year, which is high water numbers we're talking about for for people in average wages to find that amount of spare capital in their disposable income is frankly it's not doable. I think the Chancellor went some way towards addressing that by his introduction of a windfall tax in the very profitable North Sea oil, which has been spread across the UK, which are very much welcome. But that doesn't really get to the sheer scale of these rises we're seeing. I think, and given the 1.5 million, that goes some way, but that's it's the tip of the iceberg. COVID is still very much with us, and I think the cost of living crisis is very much starting now to replace the pressure that the UK wide and Scotland in particular came under. I think additional support was received to address COVID issues and grants coming into East Ayrshire, and I think we very much need this to go beyond East Ayrshire. We're very limited in what our funding can stretch to support. I think we need much more support coming in to address this. And a slightly separate issue would be the uncommitted balances. We've always had a healthy uncommitted balance, which has allowed us the flexibility to do spend to save, to to allow us to manage our budget. You know, and that's been accepted across all political parties in East Ayrshire as that was the proper way to do it. And I know what you said, you know, we've got money ring fenced for health and social care and also for the teachers that we can't touch. We really need to protect that. So that, again, limits where you can make efficiency savings. So I think, you know, what you touched on briefly, and maybe if you could expand on it a wee bit, you know, just potentials there for spend to save. I think that's very much the direction of travel to allow us to try and manage this situation as best we can.
And through you, Chair, you're absolutely right. And you know, it's at 2.6%, and you know, colleagues in finance and ICT are in the midst of writing our financial strategy to take this council through to 2027. And I suppose of the two previous strategies that started in 2012, they had, and I'll use the word advisedly, but they had the luxury of having stability. We had low interest rates and we had stability in terms of prices and inflation. This one's going to be different. So this one will require a financial strategy that will be being implemented against a backdrop of real uncertainty around inflation and around interest rates, and also around grant funding. We've been told an indication, a very high level of that for the next 5 years. And so for me, it's important that I try and get that general fund unlimited balance up to as high a level as possible, so that colleagues and Cabinet and Council can have the ability to use some of that money to pump prime savings that may not materialise until maybe year 2 or year 3. And it's by doing that different way of working, that innovative use of finances, that will allow this council to remain financially sustainable. And we'll hear tomorrow in the report from our auditors that, and this is not new to us, but there's a line in the report tomorrow that, you know, recognising the challenges facing the Scottish public sector, that the council is financially sustainable in the short term. That's 3 years. So this financial strategy will take that further and take that through into the medium term. But it can only be done so by getting that general uncommitted balance up to a level where we have the confidence and the ability to allocate funds from that to services to allow them time to change and prepare for what will be quite an uncertain future financially and operationally for the next 5 years or so.
Thanks, Joe. Bonnie?
Thank you very much, Judy. Just a few questions, Joe, and again, I think it is just picking up on the theme that people have raised already in terms of cost of living. You know, when I look at page 13 and the box at the bottom of page 13 in terms of the Scottish Welfare Fund and the fact that there's actually an underspend there within that, that would take you in one direction of travel. However, I suppose when I then look at what's actually at the bottom of page 16, where it talks about the housing benefit and council tax reduction subsidy and how that is actually increasing, it almost feels at the end of the day that we have got people at a particular stage in the journey who thankfully have not quite reached what may well be their end point in the journey in terms of making demands in the Scottish Welfare Fund, and that should be a huge concern for all of us. So again, I think, you know, that's really just putting down a marker in terms of the gravity of what it is we are actually looking at going forward in relation to that. So that's just an overall comment at that stage. Again, looking just at a couple of very specific questions to just seek clarity on. One, and I'm hoping this is the appropriate time to do it, it is in relation to carry forward in relation to schools and looking at the Pupil Equity Fund. Now, again, when I look at the table, again, on the middle of page 13, and I then look to contrast that with some of the figures that are on page 21, for me, and I do underline it's for me, I don't see the match up between what I have there, particularly in relation to Robert Burns Academy and what the figures are on page 21, so an explanation of that would be helpful. And then also, because I would like to come back to it at later pages on papers in Cabinet, on page 17, the levelling up admin grants actually related there at 145,000. So those would be my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I know, sorry, Joe. I know we're going to go into detail looking at each bit, but I don't know if there's any parts of this that we can answer just now.
And through you, Chair, so the Scottish Welfare Fund is administered by my service. It's a fund that operates and allocates crisis grants to those most in need and allocates community care grants. It's a budget we get of around £1 million a year. Last year, the year before last rather, it ended the year with a £600,000 of an underspend because Scottish Government awarded unique one-off additional funds that ploughed into that budget that year. And so the reason it's £307,000 underspent, there's two reasons for that. The first is that we had that underspend, that larger underspend for the year before. But what it does mean, and it is quite concerning, is the underspend this year is less than last year. So we're seeing more traffic coming through Scottish Welfare Fund. At the moment, thankfully, in terms of the allocation of that fund and in accordance with the rules that govern it, we have allocations and ratings of low for both crisis grants and community care grants. That's important because what low means is that if you phone and you meet the criteria for a crisis grant or a community care grant, you will get that award. In a community care grant setting, if, for example, you're asking for a bed and a couch and a cooker, then when it's low, you will get that. As pressure begins to bear in that budget as we go through the year, the regulations say that I need to change the rating from low to medium and from medium to high. And, you know, it wasn't unusual before the pandemic for there to be, towards the end of the year, ratings of high. And we manage the budget. There's a very crude way of managing the budget, but it's what we have to do in terms of the Scottish Welfare Fund regulation. Thankfully, due to pleas from this council to Scottish Government, there's now a review of the primary and secondary legislation that governs Scottish Welfare Fund to see if we can get greater flexibility about that fund's use. So yes, you're absolutely right. There is a concern there about Scottish Welfare Fund, and we're seeing in terms of council tax reduction, this is a council tax benefit for those people those families who need that additional support. We're spending more than we get in grant, and that's something that Julie Jameson and I are looking at, and we'll present that back to Scottish Government. On the Pupil Equity Fund, I'll explain that when I go through the main report, Councillor Mackay, but the 1.560 there is where us boring accountants conflict with the educationalists, because to us, we live and breathe for the 31st of March every year, whereas the teachers, they sadly go towards the end of June in the academic year. And the difference there, what you're seeing in that 1.560 is the balance that was outstanding at 31st of March, and explain what that really means for an education context when I go through the later report. And in terms of the Levelling Up Fund admin grant, so UK Government has awarded levelling up to a number of authorities. We have that, and you'll hear about that on today's agenda. But to accompany the work that's required in creating bids, capital bids for those levelling up substantial work, then an admin grant was awarded to each council. That admin grant is sitting there. I've got to be honest, I've got my eye on it because I asked Cabinet a year ago, to set aside £700,000 to allow services to prepare those bids. So that's there for the levelling up. But confident that the bids that are taken forward have done so with the confidence of having the financial wherewithal to put forward really innovative bids, Chair, that hopefully will go forward in terms of being evaluated by UK Government.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, before we get into any detail now, maybe ask Graham to ask his question about the capital programme.
Okay, you want to take it just now? I thought you might have went to the capital bit, but it's okay. Right, whatever. On the capital part, it's actually on the schools and the learning estates. Particular to my ward, we've got Lonehead Primary and ECC, and there's a projected budget of 5.6 million and the forecast of 6.29 million. So it looks like an overspend. Before I go any further, I've actually went to the parent council at the school recently, and the new facilities are excellent, really, really good. But what I really want to come back to is an issue when I was just a member of the public. I lived near the Lonehead Primary, and it's the issues of the trees being cut down during that work. And I've got a few questions that I haven't been properly answered, and I'd like to do it through this forum. I want to bring up the following points, please. And this has come up with quite a few members of the public as well at the time. So for the actual new trees which were in, and they do look good, who's actually paying for them? Is it the construction company or is it the council? What's the cost? There was a tree inspection survey again. What was the cost for that and when was it made available? Have the construction company compensated for the loss of the trees and also the loss of stored carbon given we've got the climate emergency? I also would like to ask, why was this actually allowed to happen? Was there any different properties and facilities management in sight at the time? This happened when the monoblock area was being laid. There's clear to be health and safety breaches there. I walked past the site several times in the final Friday of the Easter holidays. The school was opening the next Tuesday. I viewed poured concrete dumped into the base of a tree, stonework dumped randomly around a tree base, and in the tree inspection report, which I have a copy of, it reports in one particular tree there's a diesel spill 3 or 4 metres from the base of a stem, which will result in root poisoning. Obviously, that meant the tree to come down. Now, the school was opening on Tuesday. The Friday before that was the end of the school Easter holidays. I walked along Lonehead Street. You could barely pass on the pavement. Certainly a wheelchair or somebody with mobility issues wouldn't have been able to pass because all the construction vehicles were parked up in the pavement. And in front of me, one worker walked out with a barrow of tar, which I don't see as been appropriate to health and safety. I'd like to ask how many health and safety visits were in the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the trees being cut. And as I say, what kind of example does this set in terms of the environment? Because the perception around my area as a council is seen to be damaging protected trees, even though it might have been the construction company. And also in the tree inspection survey, there's nothing that tells us why this was allowed to happen. There's certainly failings from the construction company. On the 16th of April 2021, I was given an email as a member of the public and insurance, a specialist report, full investigating the causes would be produced. Well, there's a tree inspection report, but I don't think it actually addresses why this is allowed to happen. And we're getting new schools still be built. We have to avoid this in the future. So I'd like to address some of these issues, please, particularly the health and safety ones, and also why we got to that stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks for your one question. Very, very detailed, and it was. But I'll bring in Simon Bell in terms of the capital programme, in terms of the contracts. I'll also bring David Mitchell. But just remind members that I know you're new, and you can ask these questions beforehand to officers. You know, any local member can bring it, particularly if it's a detailed nature that maybe can't be answered at the cabinet. And maybe then, if there's still ongoing issues, we can ask the questions then. But there is the facility, on all occasions, just to ask these kind of detailed questions, and valid that they are. And I know that a number of other members, including myself, were asking questions about this, how the situation arose at the time. I think we did that at the site visit. So there was a number of points that were of concern to all local members at the time, Graham. But I'll maybe bring in Simon first of all, and then I'll bring in David Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks through you, Chair. Obviously, a number of very kind of detailed questions there that I would have difficulty kind of providing specific answers around about number of health and safety visits and the like. In terms of just a wee bit of the background, as you'll be aware, as members will be aware, there was a significant push to get the school completed for the pupils returning after the Easter break, and a number of issues that occurred in terms of the landscaping works and the trees, which resulted in the unfortunate circumstance of them having to be taken down and removed. We have been in dialogue with the contractor. We are still finalising finalising the final account for the contract, which involves a number of items to do with the project itself, but we are incorporating within that the cost of the trees, which is not something that the council should be bearing. So that is forming part of those commercial contractual negotiations with the contractor to conclude that final account. As I say, a number of very specific questions there. I don't know if I can go into great detail about some of that specific items around about diesel spillage and the like, but I can certainly look into that detail, and perhaps it's more relevant to come back to Councillor Boyd with those specific answers to his questions when I can do a little bit more research into that.
Thanks, Simon. That seems appropriate. I know a number of other local members, so I mean, if you can circulate that to cabinet members and to all the other local members, and that would be the covering the school catchment area, because I know for wards 3 and 4, if you can get an update on that, that would be helpful, Simon, in terms of the details. We've got a number of other. David, if you would maybe bring in terms of contractual issues.
There's not really much I can add, Chair. As Simon said, the client services continued discussions and negotiations with the contractor. Clearly, if any contractor or their employees act in a way that causes us loss, that puts them in breach of their obligations under the contract and causes us loss, then as members would recognise, there is the potential to seek to recover that loss. My understanding is the contractors are continuing discussion, as Simon said, and it will be dealt with through the final accounting process. So legal haven't been formally instructed and haven't needed to be instructed to pursue any claim. So I can't really add much more at the moment in terms of the detail. There was to be an investigation of the facts at the time, and I would expect that that was carried out. I don't think the report was to come to Cabinet, but presumably that report is there. That was pulled together at the time in terms of investigation of facts of what happened, and I would have thought would be available. But other than that, as I say, client service continues to deal with indirect negotiation with the contractor, and it will be dealt with through the final account.
Okay, thanks, David. So if there is any other information, I think we'd be obliged if that could be circulated to appropriate members. Okay, any other comments there? No. Okay, maybe just continue with the report in detail now and go into the revenue section. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So members, we begin on page 13, and this is where we begin to expand the detail in the covering report into specific information around services. We begin with the range of services that sit under the Chief Executive, and you can see there that in education, they ended the year with an underspend of £3.531 million. And that in itself is described in the paragraph below. We see the service carrying forward the allocation of COVID grants beyond the financial year end, and we see information around Pupil Equity Fund that's been treated in a similar way. In this budget, however, we also note that there continues to be significant budgetary pressure in terms of additional support for line and transport, which is overspending by around £700,000. And in taking these costs, the service have taken steps wherever possible to mitigate them. At this report, and at this specific report, and in line with our reserve strategy, we then explode out again what that underspend will be used to carry forward. And we can see in the grey box halfway down the page, the 4 items, the Pupil Equity Fund and the like, that comes to that 3.531. These are the funds which Linda will take forward to progress. And you can see that in terms of Pupil Equity Fund, education recovery and vocational learning, that young person's guarantee, that's only been carried forward because the works and the training that's taking place doesn't end at 31st of March, it continues beyond the year, and rightly the funding follows the young people. We take an opportunity in this report as well to look at the school carry forwards that head teachers and the management teams have generated at the year end, and that they wish to take forward and add into their next year's school budget in the areas listed. And in finance and ICT, You'll see my services for service redesign after recess. You can see a whole raft of vacancies, which is deliberate and with the support of the team and the colleagues within the service in order to allow that service redesign to take place. But as noted earlier, that Scottish Welfare Fund of £307,000 been carried forward. And we've also taken the opportunity to allocate some £215,000 to support a piece of work that the Head of Housing and Communities and I are undertaking in supporting trustees at Visions Leisure Centre, which was previously agreed by Cabinet. In governance, we see an underspend too. This reflects vacancies and also planning and building warrant fee income, which is beginning to improve, not maybe back to previous levels, but beginning to improve, which is really helpful and really good to see. If we move on to page 15 and to housing and communities. And it's important maybe to start by saying that of that £2 million that I asked Cabinet for last August, £1.7 million of that was allocated to the housing and community services to help them deal with significant additional costs due to COVID or substantial loss of income because of COVID. You can see there, however, that there are a range of underspends. And that's because of a number of things. It's because of that allocation provided by Cabinet last August. It's because, quite rightly, heads of service have taken remedial action to try and bring budgets back into line. And it's also because of additional funding that's been received to deal with COVID. And you can see that although these budgets are still dealing with COVID, they're also trying to deal with additional pressures that are coming into them and will come in the future. At the bottom of this table, you can see that the heads of service and the Deputy Chief Executive has taken the opportunity to earmark £1.068 million of that underspend of 1.756, so that they can take that forward to use in this year and beyond. Members, moving on to page 16 to wellbeing. This is a service similar to many other services in the council that has been hit tremendously hard by the pandemic. It's a service that for the whole of last financial year was able to quantify the additional costs that were being incurred, not only within the service itself, but at a certain point last year, the council and the Health and Social Care Partnership was responsible for providing a financial lifeline to private care homes to make sure that they were sustainable throughout the pandemic, and that support continues. And at a time when we enter chambers and walk around our offices without masks and face coverings, this service continues to spend significant sums on PPE for health and social care staff and for those who are helping those who are vulnerable and most in need. But what the table shows you as a story is that the service ended the year £2.1 million underspent because it was able to claim back substantial funds from the Scottish Government for that support to the private care home and for PPE and the like. In the last days of the financial year in March this year, the Scottish Government allocated a substantial sums to integration joint boards, and East Ayrshire Integration Joint Board received £11.363 million. And there was also other funds of 1.568. So the story here, members, is quite a complex story. We have the health and social care wellbeing ending the year with an underspend of £15 million, which, given the pressures they're under and given the work they have to do, seems unusual. But in going forward, the Scottish Government, in allocating that £11.363 million, has said that there is no opportunities now to go back to government with refunds or invoices or mobilisation plans. These are the funds that's been allocated to Craig and to his team. And going forward, they have to use that £15 million going forward. As you would imagine, members, there is a raft of conditions and asks that are needed by that money. And so we watch that going forward. We support Craig and the team going forward. But it is a story that needs to be told, that underspend is due to timing of receipt of a substantial grant from government, and that will be required going forward. And at the bottom of page 16, as Councillor Mackay picked up, we've got to the very bottom table in that bottom row, the housing benefit and council tax benefit subsidy, and we receive a grant of around £9 million a year to provide council tax reduction or council tax benefit. We're spending £324,000 more than we get, and we'll be speaking with government about putting in a claim for that money, given the methodology that's used to allocate council tax reduction grant to councils. And on page 17, we see the raft of central funds that are being held because of timing and because of other arrangements, particularly due to COVID. And on page 18, we begin to see the story of the housing revenue account. The housing revenue account is a unique account in each council. It can't be supported by general fund money or grants. It has to be self-managed and self-funded by housing rents and by specific grants that are attributed to the housing revenue account. As I said earlier, it ended the year £2.256 million underspent. But again, similar to wellbeing, there's a story and a half here. This was a service that started last March with a plan to renovate housing stock, and because of restrictions, we're unable to gain access to a whole number of houses. And at the same time, access to materials and access to operatives. And then Omicron hit. And so it's a service that, although it has an underspend, it's got an additional whole raft of work that needs to be taken forward urgently to spend that money. And so this again is due to timing similar to wellbeing. And members, if I can take you just to page 19 before I conclude. The table at page 19 is an accountant's dream, but that's essentially all it is. But it's a table that attempts to show to members what would happen if we were to take out all of the COVID funding. What would the council's core budget that I mentioned earlier look like? And if you take the top line, just as an example, on education, if we take out all the COVID funding that was used to maintain and support that service last year, education would not have had an underspend at the year end. It would have been overspent by £1.132 million. But you can see that by Linda and our management team drawing down £4.133 million, another £233,000 for non-specific grants, and a share of the allocation awarded at Cabinet in August, they get the underspend of 3.531, all of which is to be taken forward and used to support schools and management team going forward. And that's what that table tries to do, members. It goes back to that budget report and to those three things about the pressure on the core, about the underspend in a rather unusual year when you wouldn't expect an underspend, and the real tangible and emerging pressures that are with us for this year and beyond. Chair, with your approval, I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's a very good report in terms of the way it explains things. I think you made the point really well in terms of the underspending the 15 million marks, a whole raft of issues, and we know that a number of health and well-being issues haven't been resolved. And if you don't tackle these early, if you don't have early intervention, they just simply get worse. And it's the same with the house and revenue account, and $3 million underspend there. We all know if you don't fix a leaky roof, it just gets worse and the costs soar. I mean, that applies to every kind of aspect of what you do in housing. And if you don't attend to the jobs early enough, these problems get greater. So I think we just need to kind of watch this space and be very kind of prudent and use this as a as you said, it's an accountant's dream. But and behind that, there's a number of issues lurking in the background, and we just got to be aware of them. Ian.
Thanks, Dougie. It was just on the £15 million that you'd mentioned, Joe, for supply of PPE to both council employees and also going out to the private care home market. Obviously, as the 15 million runs down, the private care homes, which are effectively they're run for profit, there'll be a tapering off for this support. What kind of timescale are we looking at?
Chair, I don't know the answer to that question. I'll check with colleagues and come back. But it's not just as Councillor Linton knows from his previous roles. It's a raft of conditions and work that's required from that £15 million. And I think if you were to speak to the Director of Health and Social Care, he would explain that he would find it a challenge to actually do all that commitment within that £15 million envelope. So I'll find that out and come back to Councillor Linton and members of Cabinet.
Thanks, Joe. Any others? Maureen?
Thanks very much. Just under again the heading of well-being, Joe, a couple of questions. I know in the past what we meant by out with placements. I wonder if you could just give us an updated explanation of what we're using that term to cover now, please. And just also, it could be argued that across the pandemic, some of our most vulnerable groups were, of course, people with addictions. And I just wonder what percentage of that COVID additional money is to be allocated in relation to addiction services.
Through your chair, in terms of excuse me, in terms of with placements, so an out with placement occurs when professional colleagues within the council support young people who it's determined that their care will be best provided by an organisation out with East Ayrshire. And that care that's provided tends to have a social work element or a wellbeing element and an education element. And in the year that went past, as you would imagine, with the restrictions that took place, there was the usual traffic and throughput was restricted because movements were indeed restricted. But in the report, you can see that in out with placements in the right-hand column, there's an underspend of £412,000. But in the narrative, out with placements was one of those things that colleagues in wellbeing were allowed to submit an invoice or a mobilisation plan to government to claim back. And the total cost was actually £845,000 that was claimed because of the additional pressures that was placed on that and the inability to move people as quickly as would be normally the case. In terms of the second point on the relevant percentage of the allocation of the £11 million towards addictions, I don't know that, Councillor Mackay. I'll find out and come back to members.
Thanks, Joe. Any other points? Okay, that takes us through the revenue section onto the Pupil Equity Fund.
Thank you, Chair and members. The Pupil Equity Fund is a fund, an allocation around £3.5 million, if memory serves me right, maybe £4 million. That is an allocation that is provided by the Scottish Government. It's provided in a way where, in providing that allocation, the Scottish Government, having used the number of young people entitled to free school meals, then establish a calculation. And in providing that notification to councils, they detail the school name and the amount of pupil equity fund that should be passed to that school. It goes direct to each head teacher, for that head teacher and their management team, to utilise pupil equity fund in a way that supports the children who are most in need. It forms an integral part of the school improvement plan, which I'm sure you know from attending parent council meetings. And as you can see here, members, it's a list by a list along education group and by schools. The column, if I can just take you to page 22, just to provide maybe a high-level summary. The columns that are of interest are the last two on the right-hand side. So, as mentioned earlier, at 31st of March of that allocation, then 1.5 or 1.6 million pounds was not utilised at 31st of March. However, on the second last column, the schools intend using £582,000 of that £1.6 million to pay teacher salaries and classroom assistant salaries for April, May and June. And so you begin to see this continuation of the academic year taking precedence over the financial year. What it does show in the far right column is £978,000 of resources, which at this point in time, or at the year end of 31st of March, had not been committed. Now, that's a fairly high number, members, but I think you need to take it in context, as I know you will, in terms of the issues that affected both health and social care and education at the tail end of last year in autumn time, when the new variant of the pandemic of the virus hit. And that led to real challenges, not only for health and social care, but for schools in particular, where we went back, not thankfully on a whole school setting, but within specific year groups, we went back to remote learning and home-based learning. And such was the need to restrict the spread of the Omicron variant. And so at that point, as you would expect, the schools and the management team were busy organising that and trying to get the best possible learning for every young person. And so that resources that's there, you can begin to understand the pressures placed upon schools at that point. What I would say to members and to Cabinet is that underspend, we will seek approval from Scottish Government, which will be, I'm sure, will be granted, to allow that £978,000 to be retained by each school. It has in the past, and I see no issue with it this year, so that the head teachers and the management team can take that forward. It will, of course, mean that in the year we're in, they will have their current year's PEF entitlement together with this one. And so there'll be a need for colleagues in education, supported by colleagues in finance and HR and other places, to support head teachers to fully utilise that additional allocation that will be taken forward in the August start of the August 22 start of the academic year. Chair, I'm happy to stop there and take any questions from members.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Any questions in the PEF? Jackie?
I've got a question. I appreciate this COVID's had an impact on PEF funding over the past few years, but my question is, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it or come back to me, is there's a number of schools over the past years who have always consistently been unable to spend their PEF funding. Is there a reason as to why they haven't been able to spend it? And if so, what help and support has been given by both finance and education to ensure that the money should be spent to ensure that the pupils get the education that they require, and the money's just not sitting getting moved on year after year?
And through you, Chair, very conscious that the way PEF works is a bit like our reserve strategy, in that it would be quite usual for a head teacher and his or her management team to have a plan that requires a large amount of money, and so they would need to stockpile essentially the PEF allocation or an element from it that would allow that large piece of spend to take place. In terms of the support that's provided, the support is I've got to be honest, is the head of finance and ICT, the support that's provided by myself, and I know from the head of people and culture too, for what is a relatively small budget of £4 or £5 million, is far outweighs what you would expect from that budget. The support is significant in providing support to head teachers and AFAs to use that funding. We receive their plans. The head of education and chief education officer receives their plans, and they form part of the wider council's school improvement. And so it's not unusual for schools to carry forward. If you're willing to or able to give a specific example where I could chase it through, then I'm happy to do that investigation, that review, and come back to you in order to give you some comfort and some reassurance.
Back in. It's just looking through this, and I'm not going to name schools publicly, but it's the same schools always have been unable to spend their money, and it's quite hefty amounts of money that's there. And it's been since the very, very beginning of PEF that these balances have been there, and the money should be spent. And it's just come back to me on why they're unable to spend their high amounts.
I think Graham McGinn's about somewhere on screen. Graham,
Thanks, Chair, and through you, Chair, just to emphasise and concur with Joe, there's a significant amount of support for head teachers in place from HR, finance and indeed procurement colleagues to support schools to make sure that they can utilise the funding that's allocated to individual schools. In fact, it's only this week, on Friday this week, schools are due to submit their spending plans for next session. And just to address the point that Jackie has mentioned, that we'll certainly be taking a closer look at any schools who are carrying forward any funding to make sure that they are well supported to utilise the funding that they have to carry forward along with next year's allocation. I have followed up on a number of schools, and like yourself, Jackie has said, I'm not going to mention them publicly just now, but I have followed up on a number of schools where there's a high level of spend remaining, just to seek assurances that that spending will be utilised. And I do have revised plans from those head teachers. So just to back up what Joe's saying, there's certainly lots of support in place for head teachers from HR, finance and procurement colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Okay, and Jackie, if there's anything, we'll be able to follow up and kind of detail about any specific schools if you. Okay, Maureen.
Thanks very much. I hear what Jackie and what Graham are saying. I'm perhaps going to be a bit less subtle than that. And whilst not identifying schools specifically, but just draw members' attention to the fact that there are a couple of schools across this list. And I think it's important for us to note that those are largely our newest schools that we're looking at, and just asking, I think, some questions, which I think are legitimate questions, given that we can see from that list that those are our newer schools, and ask if there are any underlying factors associated with the newness of schools in terms of PEF allocations and the inability to spend that allocation. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. I think we can see that as a fair point. Linda.
Through you, Chair, it's an incredibly valid point, Councillor Mackay, and actually one that I'm sure other members have been drawn to. I'm in the same boat. I'm going to be very, very clear with members and colleagues that this absolutely is a matter devolved to head teachers for their leadership and management in terms of the devolution of these funds through the DSM scheme, but at the same time also to recognise that there is support that the teams receive from HR, finance, procurement and indeed the central team. I would say, Councillor Mackay, I don't think that newness is a factor. I think newness in the concept around a campus is perhaps a factor, again, not wishing to identify specifics, but I think there are much needed further discussions needing had in the education groups, which we have set back up, Councillor Mackay, because I think the point you're making is incredibly valid in that, you know, is there actually a validity around about the amount of PEF that's there, and what are the barriers to the spend, and I think that's a highly appropriate issue. So given that certainly in one education group you could actually quantify £250,000 across 3 schools, and indeed add in 2 more who are also in receipt of significant amount of PEF, you get towards the £480,000 mark, which actually represents nearly half of the spend that is being taken as a carry forward. The only thing that I can offer, Councillor Mackay, in this is that probably the campus approach is perhaps a factor in this about joint spend, and indeed when we've gone back to that particular campus, we have referenced the need for joint spend and thinking right across the sectors. And the other piece is, colleagues, you'll be aware that early years has never had a slice of PEF, if you like, if I can refer to it as that, and we are encouraging colleagues now to think with our early years colleagues about how PEF might support the young people as they come through. So ultimately there has been a devolution in terms of thinking. Councillor Mackay, ultimately one of the other points of concern for me at the moment is that a lot of the areas where there is an underspend are actually areas of significant deprivation. So please be assured from my own perspective that we are working closely with those teams, and as Graham says, we've had an update from all of the centres where we consider the PEF underspend not to be at an acceptable level, and I'm going to be as blunt as that with you today because I don't find some of the spends or underspends acceptable. But it is a matter devolved to heads with the parent councils and staff and indeed young people to take forward, and we are absolutely insistent on this being portrayed in the improvement plan as per statutory guidance. So I think, Councillor Mackay, I don't think there's a link to newness, but I think there are possible links towards joint working that are new in some areas that could possibly be a barrier.
Thanks, Linda. Barry, you want to end your hand up? Yeah. Barry.
Yep, thank you, Dougie. No, just I think to kind of go on with that, we have, again, I know we're not naming a school, but this is a public paper. At the end of the day, we have one school within an education group, that one primary school, and that's what worries me more than anything. It's relatively smaller scale than our secondaries. It has 60% of that education group's underspend, and the second highest across the authority. Now, I get the issue in terms of campuses. I kind of understand it. In fact, I will name a school in this regard that certainly in the last term of the council, we did see some issues around the William McIlvanney campus in terms of those schools bedding in. But now we absolutely see, you know, Kilmarnock Academy and James Hamilton Primary School in particular with very low levels because they have got used, you know, they've been able to work as a campus, and I think they're working really, really effectively. In fact, actually, Kilmarnock Academy you know, did a presentation to governance and scrutiny when I was chair, absolutely detailing what they were doing with PEF, and I think that was really, really welcomed by members at that time. But as I say, we do have one school in particular that clearly stands out and is a massive concern to me. And given you've raised it quite rightly, Linda, the issues around deprivation. However, we have a neighbouring school to that particular school that has significantly less. They are managing to use the PEF and have probably some of the highest levels of deprivation across Scotland, never mind across our authority. So I do think, you know, we need that. Again, I get some real concerns about one particular school, if I'm entirely honest. But I think just to highlight that, you're going to take it back, and I think you've been as blunt and honest as you can be, and rightly so, as we would come to expect from you, Linda, that we've got some issues here and we need to resolve them. But thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Members have been kind enough not to name the school, but I think we all know where we need to go with this. And I think, you know, the point's been well made, and I'm quite sure Linda and Graham will be on the case with this one. Okay, I think that's us with people like, but equity fund onto alternative delivery models, and take us through that is Joe again.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the following few pages just give us financial information and performance information in respect of what's known as alternative delivery models. And in the case of East Ayrshire, that's Ayrshire Roads Alliance, that partnership between the road services within East Ayrshire and South Ayrshire Council, their capital budget. And then we give financial information in respect of East Ayrshire Leisure Trust. In respect of Ayrshire Roads Alliance, I'm grateful to colleagues for issuing a new page for page 24. The table at the top should actually have brackets around all of those figures to show that the Ayrshire Roads Alliance ended the year underspent, and that ties in with the narrative. And I apologise for any inconvenience that caused members, but you can see that in terms of those underspends in ARA, they're due to reduced staffing costs, holding vacancies, and issues around some additional costs offset by some further income being received. And in terms of East Ayrshire Leisure Trust, the report that I gave to members in February, the Leisure Trust at that point was projecting to end the year, I think, £100,000 overspent. And the action that the Leisure Trust has taken has been significant in those past few months by allocating additional funds from within the budget to try and offset the pressures within the sports development area, and also their ability to attract alternative funding has saw them end the year £455,000 underspent, an incredible end of year outturn for the service. And I suppose if you draw any comfort from anything in that table, members, it would be the sports development ended the year £67,000 overspent. That's gyms. We have a serious issue, not just in East Ayrshire, but across the UK, with gyms not making a great deal of money. And so by doing the work across budgets, across the trust, and by attracting additional funding, they ended the year with that underspend. And if you just indulge me, Chair, I'll just carry on and conclude and take us through the Treasury section. The following few pages on Treasury, gives you a very high level overview of the council's indebtedness in respect of our building of our new schools, our roads, and the like. And it also gives details of the investments that we hold. Now, as I said, members will give specific training on finance in group settings, and you'll have the ability to learn more about Treasury through the 3 Treasury management reports that are presented to Council at various points throughout the year. But this page essentially shows you that we have a debt portfolio of £400,000. 3/4 of that debt is with an institution called the Public Works Loan Board. That's just an arm of the Treasury, where local government has the ability to go there and get favourable interest rates and borrowing for favourable interest rates. And we had around £35.5 million of investments. And you know, it's important to note that we do have investments. So we have our uncommitted balance, but we also receive our grant from the Scottish Government every Wednesday. And so that sometimes is invested, and we have a range of counterparties that full council approve each year. That allows us the confidence to place that money in relation to the parameters of security, liquidity and yield, which I'll explain more as part of the Treasury programme in due course. Chair, I'm happy to stop there before we hand across to Simon to take us through the capital programme.
Thanks, thanks, Joe. Just a couple of wee points from me. Just maybe if we can, I mean, I personally visited the Kilmarnock bus station with Barry McDonnell, and I know that there'd been quite a bit of slippage there. Just looking for some reassurance for all local members, because I know there is quite a bit of discussion with Kilmarnock bus station, in particular the seating replacement. I know that was an issue. I think we're looking for conventional seats, and I know particularly amongst the older people that regularly use the buses these days, that purchase is not particularly the best appropriate seating arrangements for some of the elderly people. And can also remember, is there any update in terms of the issue at the AAA and the river erosion? Has that been sorted? And just a general question, and just I don't know, in terms of a couple of years ago, in terms of gym use prior to COVID, we knew that was a kind of cash cow for a number of multi sports facilities. But is this a trend that's due to COVID, and are we expecting to capture that back once the COVID's over, or is it long-term use? Is it going to be problematic in the long term? So if you could maybe those 3 for me, Joe.
Chair, I'm happy to take the last one, and maybe Simon can come in with the first 2. But in terms of gyms, we know that from previous reports to Cabinet around other trusts that require some financial support because of the pandemic. Those trusts are now trying to model what gym usage will look like going forward, and whether it will return to what would be known as a traditional model. I think the view is that it will not return to that, and what the Leisure Trust and Annika have done here is to move to a class-based system where they're teaching in classes and taking stuff forward with specific leisure service sessions, rather than the idea of a person going in to work alone. And it seems to be working for the Leisure Trust. So I think it's a job, and it's a work in progress in terms of what happens with gyms going forward. But and all members know where we are in terms of the other trusts in our area, and the reports that will feed back in due course about that. And at that point, we'll have a better indication of what's actually happening in that sector. But I'm happy to stop there, and I know that Simon can probably come in on the first 2 around the bus station and the AAA.
Thanks, Simon. Simon there. Well, I'm sure he'll give us an update if I have any. Annika, can you're on? I know it's not directly yours, but if you have any information about the, the capital works at the AAA and sorry, Colin.
I'm on, yes, I'm on. As far as I'm aware, the engineering reports are all complete, and but Simon will know better than I do. Sorry.
Okay, well, I hope to update members when I have a response to those two issues. If Simon rejoins us, I'll come back to that. Morning.
Thanks ever so much. It was also just add if we could add in the multi-story, and obviously that's going to have associated impact on the town centre, and I know there's a great deal of concern about that, and we really need timescales and understand what those timescales are. There are obviously particular times of the year where that would be particularly difficult for traders, so we really need that brought forward to give us an indication of what that is as soon as possible, please.
Thanks, Warren. We'll get those three issues. We'll update members as soon as we. That's right. We'll move to if Simon rejoins us in the meantime. We'll come back to it. Ian.
Just really to back up what Maureen's saying, I think we have a duty to keep the traders, particularly in the Foregate, up to date with what's going on, because I don't think the correspondence has been great so far.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Okay, the next section is Treasury. I know we've done that. People.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. People pages start on page 36. So I'm not intending going through all the detail, but just pull out some points, and then obviously happy to answer any questions. So at the top of page 26 shows the breakdown of the absence statistics for the year, showing work days lost per employee at 12.02. That's an increase of 5.47 from last year, which is quite significant. At the bottom of the same page, members will note that all the categories of long-term absence have decreased from last year, and that's about things starting to open up and things starting to move along, with people starting to get hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, etc. But the short-term absence has increased in each of the areas. Over the page, I would note that the occupational health referrals have more than doubled than the year before, but the early interventions are less than half than the year before. And also following on from that, physiotherapy appointments were double last year for what they have been this year, and the employee counselling appointments have increased. I think it's fair to say with all the absence statistics, they're very different to the patterns that we previously had followed. Things were significantly lower last year with the impact of COVID, and as things have opened up, things are changing. And I would just note that part of that, we are doing deep dives into all the statistics, and we have created a temporary post within my service to support the services going forward with the absence stats, because there is still a bit unknown yet in the fallout from COVID. Over the page, in page 38, the top table, disciplinary action, noting that there was one within the partnership that was still under consideration for information that's now been closed, and there was no further action taken. And the second half of that page is our workforce plan key performance data. So for the first table, which is the head count, over the last year, it's increased by 196 employees. And then the table at the bottom is the full-time equivalent, which has increased in a similar variance. Our under 25s, noting an increase of 93 employees over the last year, with 82 of those carrying out apprenticeships. And obviously there's a paper further on with the jobs and training, so we look to see that increase in significantly over the next few months. Recruitment details in the bottom of that page, just to give members an overview of the posts advertised and filled. I would just note that we are, like many other organisations, now starting to struggle with some areas to fill posts. So we're looking at how we can advertise those differently and attract more. And in particular, one area within housing and communities and ARA, we're looking at how we can put together the seasonal posts to create permanent posts so that they may work in ARA, continuing that seasonal work in the winter, and then in cleaner and greener over the summer period. And on the page 40, you'll see some of our organisational development, key performance indicators, just indicating the numbers through the face experience, coaching programme and the spaces for listening, and a few quotes. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Any questions, Claire, then Ian?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Amanda, for your explanation on the absence statistics. They are quite worrying. So I'm glad we're going to have a deep dive into them, and they've got somebody temporary in post on that. So I look forward to hearing back on that. And also, there's been an awful lot of talk this week about the use of seasonal workers and merging them into two, and it seems to be being very well received as we are facing a shortage in recruitment. So thank you very much for the paper.
Thanks, Claire. Ian?
Just on a similar point, I think I welcome the rolling of the seasonal workers into permanent contracts. I think that, particularly given the difficulty of hiring seasonal workers, as you mentioned earlier, to do with Brexit and whatever else, I think this is giving real security to people that want to come and work for East Ayrshire, and hopefully that will address some of the problems in terms of grounds maintenance and whatnot over the piece.
Thanks, Ian. Barry?
Thanks, Dougie. It was just to ask Amanda, any particular sectors where we really feel we are struggling, and we're seeing themes maybe across Ayrshire, but across the 3 Ayrshire authorities and across the country, because I certainly hear from other local authorities, particularly in the planning side, absolutely really struggling to get people. I would have hoped and thought that the opportunity working in local government, particularly with the home working and that hybrid working opportunity, may have suited a different group of people, and perhaps opened up the opportunities for people to come and work in local government and go further afield from perhaps where home is. But are we, what are we doing to try and take advantage of that, and any particular sectors that we really feel we're struggling in?
You, Chair. Yeah, we are seeing similar to the other Ayrshires and wider across Scotland. With regards to the flexible working, etc., we're obviously putting that in all our adverts and encouraging that so that it's promoted. Where we're seeing at this point in time is there's some posts within ARA, within greener and cleaner communities, particularly seasonal workers that we've talked about, but also refuse drivers. Some temp admin posts, job share and the trades. And a lot of those through the jobs and training will be taking them forward, although they're not an immediate answer, but obviously part of that succession planning and getting folk into apprenticeships and moving on. The services have also taken on people through Kickstart, etc. So those placements will then naturally move on. So hopefully encouraging that and wider advertising. Just trying to look at how differently we can approach, and hopefully now with things starting to move to more open after the summer, we can start with talking to London, our colleagues, about getting into the schools, etc., to encourage people through that area that we've not been able to do at this point. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Amanda. Yep, Barry.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just to come back in on that, Amanda. No, I appreciate your answers. Obviously, we've got the perfect storm emerging of an older workforce, and the potential if we're struggling to fill posts. And I just wondered if there's any comment you could give further than that. And just wondered if the council were using LinkedIn. I know there's a number of social media platforms, but I see other local authorities, particularly the other 2 Ayrshires, seem to use it a lot. So I just wondered what the process in terms of that was as well.
Through you, Chair. At this point in time, no, we have not used LinkedIn, but we do have a small working party through People and Culture and involving some people for the services to look about how we do that wider, because we are aware and we've had an approach from them to start looking at that. So we're doing that. Our succession planning is in place through the services. A lot of that comes down to the jobs and training as well. And you'll see in the next paper, the policy review, we've extended the explanation about succession planning within the recruitment and selection policy. So we don't have a one-stop answer, but we are trying all avenues to address that. And when we come back after the recess, we were next reiteration of the workforce plan, there'll be further detail within that as well.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Okay. Oh, Maureen, sorry.
Right, thanks very much. Amanda, it was just to ask very specifically, and I think it would be useful for all of us just to know exactly how many vacancies we're currently carrying. Just as an overall figure, I think that's something, you know, that would be helpful going forward. Ian, Claire mentioned, and I would also welcome the rolling of seasonality of jobs. However, I have spoken very recently and it's a fewer number than I would have expected. So I would be looking just for that to be explored further about how we can extend that against all of the seasonal posts that we actually have at the moment. As a local authority, we really have unique services that other employers don't have. And particularly some of these seasonal posts I know are at the very lower ends of where our pay brackets as an employer actually are. But we also have, you know, the wonderful services of our financial inclusion teams that other employers don't. And I suppose what I'm looking for here is just some assurances that we are actually utilising all of the council services that we have to be able to fully promote ourselves as an employer that really can give people real support right from day one. By that, I mean that I represent an area where, for example, within a space of 200 yards, the well life expectancy has got a 20-year gap between 50.5 years and 70.5 years from Onthank to Glasgow Road. Now, that means that there is something real that we can be doing to change the course of that going forward. And I think that is about utilising those very specialist services that we have. So as that perhaps if our entry-level pay within the council is not as attractive, we can actually use our other services to show people what the opportunities, so people perhaps who have been long-term unemployed, who have the opportunity with some of these posts that don't require the same level of educational background or past skills background, that we can actually look how we can go forward. And I think that's something that I would really be encouraging us to do.
No, I think we'd all support that in terms of getting people back to work, particularly, you know, the long-term unemployed. And we heard that, you know, in the IJB presentation about some of the disparities and well-lived years, you know, in some of the areas. It was frightening. And we need to do all we can to address that. So, Amanda.
Through you, Chair, I'll come back to members with the specific numbers of the vacancies and the number of seasonal workers, but we are already working across services, and there's further reference in the jobs and training, and there's been a board, an employability board set up to make sure that we are capturing all that. And again, within the jobs and training makes reference to the long-term unemployed and all the employability schemes that we're hoping to tap into as well.
Okay. Okay, Maureen.
You know, what I don't want to give is an impression that I am being critical here without trying to come forward with some innovative ways of thinking, that we are all in this together. We are seriously facing this cost of living crisis. And I just want to say that we want to bring forward ideas to actually develop this and really make this the very best that we possibly can.
No, absolutely. It's worth restating that. I mean, I think we would support that and support some of the interventions that we're doing. Drew.
Thanks, Chair. Just, Amanda, just a wee bit of clarification on the outdoor amenities and ARA working together. I knew about this, that the talks were ongoing about this, and it's a great plan. Can they jobs actually, can they be applied for just now? There's still a bit of tweaking to do yet.
Through you, Chair, so not at the moment, so we're still finalising that and pulling them together, exactly what's required and going through the job evaluation process, but we're hoping to have them finalised very soon.
That's fine, Amanda, thank you.
That's good. No, we'll look forward to that. Something we've been trying to establish for quite a bit of time. That's good. Okay, I know Simon's back, but maybe just get him to catch his kind of breath, and maybe I'll take health and safety, then go back to capital. David.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. Just to get the year-end health and safety performance report, and if I could just draw members' attention to the top of page 42 of the report. Been noted that the number of non-reportable incidents that have been reported through the health and safety section is increased by 704 when we compare that to 2020-21, where the number of non-reportable, number of reportable incidents to HSE have decreased slightly by 5. That number of 704 is actually quite a high number, but I have to say that it's been heavily affected by coronavirus restrictions that were particularly in place between 2020-21 and more particularly in periods 2, periods 3 and periods 12 and periods 13, which coincided with the start of the pandemic and also coincided with the Omicron variant. So while that number's high, I have to draw members' attention to the fact that it's very, very heavily influenced by coronavirus restrictions. Possibly a more accurate representative, Chair, if I could use pre-COVID figures from 2019-20 as the comparator, and if I use those figures, we saw 1,227 non-reportable incidents come through to us. And again, if we look at that against this year, there was 1,911 non-reportable incidents. So we saw a very slight reduction, but a reduction nonetheless. If I could draw members' attention to the bottom of page 42 of the summary report, incidents under the category of violence and aggression accounted for 63% of the incident reports we've received and remain, as I have in previous reports, the highest cause of incident that come through to us. As members would expect, Chair, we continue to work with all the services and our trade union colleagues to reduce incidents under violence and aggression as far as we practically can, but this is a very challenging area of safety practice for us, as members would understand. On page 9, paragraphs 28 to 31 of the Covenant report, that outlines the positive work being done in mental health first aid training and our Here to Listen suicide prevention strategy. And so far, Chair, slight difference to the figures we've got here because this is ongoing work. We've trained 110 people in mental health first aid and 170 people in suicide first aid. And these people are all embedded not only in our services, but also in our communities, providing support to people in crisis. The courses are organised each month up until December this year, and both are filling up rapidly and are proving very, very popular with staff and communities. And what this demonstrates, Chair, is just equal importance this council puts in mental health first aid as well as physical first aid. And I'd be happy to take any questions on the content of the report.
Thanks very much, David. That's really encouraging to hear that. You know, we have had our issues in terms of some of these suicide and mental health issues, and it's good to see our staff coming forward to get that training. That's really, really encouraging. Ian?
No, I agree, Dougie. I think it's great, and also the fact you're rolling it out to the wider community as well. We're asset transferring. Is it also available for some of our arm's length? I'm thinking particularly the Commonwealth Leisure Trust, which my role there, which I've already declared.
Through you, Chair, absolutely, Councillor Linton. We're reaching out to absolutely everybody. In fact, we've had a very heavy number of Scottish Fire and Rescue colleagues coming onto the training recently, and people coming through for the communities and the third length organisations and their colleagues and Leisure Trust, etc. So it's effectively open to all, Chair. Is the simple answer to that question.
Maybe it's a thing for maybe elected members as well. Just it'd be worthwhile. Absolutely. Yeah. Some of us have done it. There you are. Okay, Jackie.
Can I ask a question about the high percentage of non-reportable incidents within education? Without going into any specifics, could that be, is that as a result of maybe COVID and his pupils been off for 2 years, or is it an entirely different cause of the incidents?
Through you, Chair, it's fairly complex. in terms of the incidents, and as I've said in previous cabinets, it's very difficult for me to answer that question without really going into specific detail, but I'd be happy to take it off table, Chair, and provide any specifics required to that. But it's a very complex area that we have, and what I can say about those numbers is that they were heavily influenced with coronavirus. So we had a lot of children being taught at home at the start, and Omicron with further restrictions and people being taught in classrooms, and also contact with the public as well. It has to be said, this isn't just specific to education. We're seeing these figures right across the board.
Thanks, Dave. Okay. Eddie,
can I just add a bit, in respect to that point, David, presents these to us in my Chief Executive's Health and Safety Strategy Group that we sat on jointly with our trade union colleagues. And actually, some of these figures are things that we speak about at every meeting in terms of the concerns of, staff. And it usually, as we can see them here, it's either our education establishments or our children's houses, where some of our children have real challenges. And actually, it means that staff are then getting into difficult situations day on day. And it's not only the specific incidents that we talk about, it's that thing about knowing every day that you're going into a difficult situation. But the solutions about this is how do we support our children, and how do we get them in a better place. But I just think it's, we do talk about it, everyone, and so when the figures come here, I think it's only fair to share with members that this is a specific area of concerns from our trade unions, and that they bring it up with us in order to make sure that we support our staff in these difficult situations. And David does a grand job in terms of that.
Drew.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank David and his team, Michelle Stokes, again, for all the hard work they're doing at Lochdoon, the water safety works up there. We've got that rolling out to the schools now. We've started with the local schools, but hopefully that will roll out as a rolling programme to all the schools. So thanks very much, David.
Thanks, Drew. Okay. Well, now maybe just go back to before I take the complaints on this, maybe go back to Capital just now, now Simon's get his link back up. Just before, I don't know if you'd missed the earlier question, Simon. It was to do, we're looking basically for an update where we are with the bus station, particularly the Seaton, and in Kilmarnock, and the multi-storey car park demolition, particularly the dates, and issues around the AAA in terms of the river erosion issue, and if that's going to be where we are in terms of getting those issues resolved. If you could maybe put that as part of your report. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll maybe just address those points first. So with the bus station, the project's been led by colleagues in ARA. I know there are some concerns just now around about Stagecoach and the operation arrangements around about that are perhaps delaying the progress. So I would need to actually go back to, as I say, my colleagues in ARA on that one, just to get you a better update of exactly where we are with that. In terms of the multi-storey, we're moving forward with the preparation for the demolition. So and with colleagues in estates looking at the options for the relocation of the tenants there. There's just one group that we're still need to reach a final conclusion on. So that's allowed us to start doing some of the utility disconnection works and prepare for asbestos testing and the like. And we're also looking at the requirement to maintain the bridge access, which is needed by some of the occupiers at the upper level at the fore gate. So there's a bit of design work is needed there to finalise the scheme for that, and that will allow the building warrant to be lodged. But the plan is to get the project on site at the early part of next year. We obviously don't want to impact on Christmas trading for the traders in the area. So the plan is to start on site early next year and have it finished before the end of the year. At the Ayrshire Athletics Arena, we've engaged with specialist consultants to develop a scheme for stabilisation of the riverbank, which is showing signs of erosion, one of these implications of climate change. and there's a very sort of complex technical scheme being put forward to introduce piling along the riverbank there. So that's being developed just now. I'm just trying to refresh my memory about the timescales, because we need to avoid fish spawning season in the river. So I think it's scheduled for a start probably around about the summer of next year, but I just need to maybe check that one to get the exact dates. But it is moving forward, and we're working closely with the consultants. So I'll maybe just stop there if there's any kind of further questions around about those three specifics.
No, it's obviously a worry. I know you have these delays because of the Rivers Trust, etc., and the issues with fish spawning. But it's just we're getting more flash flooding, and there's erosion right up the River Irvine, and it's just the longer you leave it, the more risks there is to some of the construction work round about it. Ian wanted to go in on that.
Yeah, just to re-emphasise the point we made earlier, Dougie, about the consultation with the shop owners and the foregain, and they're fully informed as the work progresses. I mean, obviously it's going to have a significant impact on them, and I think it's appropriate that they are kept fully abreast of what's going on.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, thanks, Chair. So in terms of the general capital programme, it is making good progress, but as has been discussed a number of times today, there's significant challenges around about construction inflation and the supply of materials due to a range of factors that we've talked about: the impact of COVID, Brexit, the conflict in Ukraine, and energy prices. But we are still making good progress. Conscious there's still a few reports to go through today, so I won't go through the main coloured report in great detail, but just give you a brief update on a selection of projects in terms of their stage of development. So at the moment, there's approximately £50 million of construction contracts that are on site, and that includes the restoration works at Dean Castle, which is nearing completion with handover anticipated mid-July. We have the refurbishment and extension to Crosshouse Primary School and Communication Centre. That's also well advanced, with completion anticipated later in July. New build Nether Third Primary School, that's progressing well. Steel frames complete, the roof's completed, and the internal works are ongoing. And we have a number of new build housing developments as part of the SHIP programme. That includes Witch Road in Kilmarnock, Millishields, Drongan, Bellevue Gardens, Kilmarnock, and Quarry Now in Auchinleck. And there's also some early years projects as part of the 1140 hours expansion at Dalmellington, Fenwick and Catrin. Projects that are at a technical design stage include the Dunlop Early Childhood Centre, where market testing is almost complete and the works are anticipated to start over the summer. We have the St Sophia's Ennerfit refurbishment, where contract awards anticipated a bit later in the year. And the Galston office project, where planning consent's recently been granted and the technical designs are being progressed. In terms of projects at the earlier stages of development, they include the Doon Valley Community Campus. That's now restarted at the RIBA Stage 2 concept design stage, following the recent Cabinet agreement of additional funding. And we're progressing projects linked to the Ayrshire Growth Deal, including the core project, where options are being explored to rationalise the design to reduce costs. Moorfield Phase 3, where draft proposals are being developed, and the AMIC Ayrshire Manufacturing Investment Corridor project, where a programme's now been developed and the design team's in place. So just a quick highlight, Chair, of some of the some projects, and happy to take any questions on these or any others in the report.
Thanks, Simon. Any questions for Simon? Maureen?
Trying, Simon, because I'm aware time is going on here. You've given us 50 million of projects that are actually on site. Projected value at the technical design stage, projected value at the earlier stage, I think is worthwhile, just having that as a look at where we actually are. Again, I could make some wider comments, but I want to just return to my earlier comment. Rather than just sitting here every time East Ayrshire performs and being negative, I actually want to get in the bones about some of the difficulties that we've had and look at how we can actually come forward again with some perhaps different thinking to actually ensure that we get more on time and within the projected budget.
Okay. Simon, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A very good point, Councillor Mackay, about the values at the different stages. It's not something I could just answer off the top of my head, but I'll certainly get you that information, and I think it's probably useful just to highlight that to members that each East Ayrshire performs as well. Obviously, challenges of delivering projects on time and on budget is significant just now in relation to the issues that I highlighted. Construction inflation and the volatility in the marketplace is a significant challenge, and material prices are equally challenging just now, but it's one that we're trying to mitigate as much as we can.
Thanks, Simon. I was just going to make the point about the Dean Castle restoration project. I think quite a few of us went up to see it earlier on in the week, and I think it was one of these projects. As you went, the castle exposed itself. There's new rooms discovered that hadn't been anticipated, and the chapel. I think that was an amazing discovery. But there's other wee bits and pieces that thankfully we've been able to find a solution as the project was well underway, and I think that flexibility has been really appreciated, and hopefully it will be of value to us in the future. So I think to be congratulated in that particular project. So Ian, no, sir. Jump.
Thanks, David. Simon, my question's run about the core project and the affordability cap on that and the design. I demonstrate a project that we're all looking forward to. Is this going to be watered down any with the new design that's coming for what we're initially expecting?
Thanks, through you, Chair. A significant exercise has been undertaken just now just to try and bring the project back in line. But just to reassure you that we really need to make sure that we deliver on the outcomes that as the fundamental parts of the brief of the core. So we wouldn't be looking to take out, we wouldn't be looking to water it down, as you say. It's to try and reduce costs where possible, but still maintain the quality and the aspects of the brief that we need to deliver on it.
Maureen, yeah.
Much, and I'm really trying not to keep us going on this. Just in terms of the core project, I note that in the main body of the covering report, there is a request to declare as surplus the schoolhouse at Cumnock Academy. Again, just looking at that, does that not present us with some opportunity to perhaps do, as part of the core project, a retrofit? Because I would imagine that the schoolhouse at Cumnock Academy is a design of a building that is, there are very similar buildings within that particular area. And part of one of the outcomes that I know from the core is to look at how we do actually do retrofit of buildings. And if we're already sitting with a building which is similar to other buildings within our ownership at the moment, do we not have an opportunity to link that in relation to core? I just asked as an overall question.
I'm aware that David's working on that, David McDowell.
Yeah, no, first of all, it's a good point, Councillor Mackay. Retrofit is something that obviously we're looking at as a council. Obviously working with Blair Miller, we've looked at a number of areas of retrofit, but we're looking probably at the housing stock, the existing housing stock. That particular building, we've asked for it to be declared surplus because we actually have businesses interested in moving into that area. But as the process goes, that we just can't offer it to a business, we'll have to put it out in the open market. So that's the kind of the background to this. The business is keen to utilise the building, have a change of use from that former residential area into an office accommodation, and take that forward and look to actually invest in some more local jobs in the area. So that's the kind of the background to it. But we do have to, as part of the state programme, have to go through a process to put that out to the open market. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
I think the core of what it is actually because it's the former janitor's house. It's not typical of the rest of the housing in the area. And we've spoke to like Blair actually when he's looking at retrofit or any other options. He wants to use the actual housing that's in the area to do it rather than anything that's not just like that. So you're right. If it was the exact same as other houses, it would be a great opportunity. It's not. It's the janitor's house and actually looks very different from the other housing that we have.
That's helpful. Okay, on to complaints and risks. First of all, complaints. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Page 45 lays out the complaints made in this quarter, the last quarter of the year. The narrative explains the 33 risks that were captured and the 30 that came in and the 3 that carried forward. The table in the middle of the page shows the complaints at each stage and the number who were dealt with within time and the outcome of that complaint, whether it was fully upheld, partially upheld or not upheld or resolved. And it's important to note here, members, that we do receive complaints. We are a complex organisation, but in dealing with those complaints, we utilise the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman's complaints model, which has a definitive process that is helpful not just for us but for those who have a need to complain. And in doing so, we take that through various stages. But as you can see at the bottom of page 45, we do set out the learning from those complaints for services, and that's an important concept in terms of those complaints. And you can see that in terms of the number of complaints that were dealt with at stage 1 and the number of times to deal with those complaints, that has declined. And that, again, as we're seeing in some of the complaints coming through my service, you're beginning to see really complex complaints that maybe have sat for a while because of other factors that are now coming in and take some more time to resolve. With your approval, Chair, I'll just move on to risks, if that's okay. And again, an organisation like the Council, we have service-specific risk registers, and where we feel the need as a CMT, as a Council Management Team, to escalate that risk to the corporate risk, then it rests itself on this document. You'll see a number of risks contained within these pages. You'll see a rating of high, medium and low. And I don't intend going through them all, Chair, but just to give an update on some of the ones in risk 1A. This deals with the level of grant funding that we'll receive as a council going forward. It mentions, gives a nod to the resource spending review in the medium-term financial plan published by Scottish Government last month. You'll hear more about that in the strategic plan that will be presented to Council, and also that financial strategy that will be presented to Council in after recess. You'll hear more about it in the cross-party sounding board. And it's almost that time of the year, members, where we'll have to put in place and in diaries the beginnings of the budget working group as we go forward, where again we'll drill down into this information in far more detail. In terms of risk B, this is about the income that's going to be collected by the council. You've heard in this report that we're spending particularly more in terms of council tax reduction, and you'll hear more about the plans for debt collection, both for rents and for council tax, as part of the finance and ICT service redesign. And I suppose risk 1C is the one that is giving us some cause for concern at the moment, and this is about the local economic position having a direct impact on our residents. We mentioned here the cost of living crisis that's taken place, and I probably couldn't put it better than members have this morning. We are East Ayrshire Council. My goodness, we punch above our weight when it comes to helping people in our communities, and we find innovative ways of doing things. But this problem, as we can see from both UK and Scottish Government, is so big that we can support it and support individuals, but we will never cure it. And so it's about bringing forward that cost of living paper together with other initiatives and other recommendations to Cabinet in due course that can deal with that. In terms of 2A, just picking up the point that you'll see a paper today on this agenda on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and on members on the risks for 2B and 3. This will be the last time that you will see these on the corporate risk register, but the action that's been done in terms of colleagues from legal and in people in communities in respect of risk 2B, and in terms of the substantial work that's been done over many years by colleagues across the council in terms of risk C, risks 3, then you'll see that leave the corporate risk register at the next East Ayrshire Performance Report that you'll see in August. And I suppose just moving on to risk number 11, and just to conclude, Chair, this deals with the risk of pandemic, and we're very conscious of the Scottish Government's 4 harms, and this hits harm 3 and hits harm 4, and it's around the issues around economic harm that the pandemic has produced, made worse by cost of living, and so a risk that's been monitored by services across the council. It's on our corporate risk register, and it's one where we're actively seeking actions that can alleviate some of that risk. We'll never mitigate it, but we can try and help it. Chair, that concludes the East Ayrshire Performance Report. The recommendations for members and for Cabinet today are on paragraph 3 of page 3 of this report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's been 2 hours, but I think it's been well worth going through and see some of the detail there. I've been moving the recommendations. Ian.
So we got just to say that my congratulations to the staff. When Joe mentions the fact that the 2B and 3 are moving over a risk register, given the significant risk that was the exposure the council had to both these, over many years. I think it's a tribute to the hard work that's been done in addressing both these. And once again, I congratulate all the staff involved.
Thanks very much for that, Ian. I know I think that would be if Joe could pass that on to various staff involved in that. And thank you very much for the service towards that. Okay, can we agree the recommendations on page 3? Okay, and now going to 3E, which is the proposed school term dates. And Linda.
Through you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Present to you this very speedy report, I hope. Colleagues, I bring to you for your consideration this afternoon the term dates for education for the academic year 2023 through 24. Paragraphs 1 through 3 cover the purpose of the report. It's a standard report that we do bring every year, and that's to advise Cabinet of the outcome of the consultation for this particular academic year, seek Cabinet's approval to implement the preferred option, and to homologate the closure dates for 22-23, which we apologise were omitted from the last report. So we're seeking to bring them into this paper, colleagues. There are 5 recommendations this afternoon, first of which is to agree option 1, appended as Appendix 1 as the school term dates. The same, colleagues, for Appendix 2, option 1A, to become the school closure dates. As an addenda to pre-agenda, colleagues, Ayr Gold Cup has now been confirmed, and you will see that date added to the paper for the September break in academic year 23-24. Clearly, we've paid homage to the potential for a general election, and that would then become an in-service day for our schools to prevent loss of learning, and indeed returning to purpose 3 to homologate the closure dates, colleagues. Paragraphs 5 through 10, colleagues, cover the background to the report. They cover the aspects of the consultation, the timing of spring break, the consistency in the pattern of holidays that is loosely required nationally and also on a local basis with the other 2 Ayrshires, and indeed in para 10, the consultation on the closure days with the professional associations, colleagues. So the proposal then covers, colleagues, in paragraph 11, to ask for your permission to go with option 1, and paragraphs 12 through 14, there are no financial nor community nor risks in any of those aspects listed there. So, Chair, thank you very much, and I pass that back for any questions and Cabinet's consideration.
Thanks very much, Linda. Any questions? Okay, we'll look forward to paying homage to the general election, Linda. But can we agree the recommendations? Okay. The item 4, which is the policy review schedule, is that Amanda?
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to recommend to Cabinet proposed changes following reviews of employment policies, which are detailed in paragraph 1. The background is laid out in paragraphs 3 through to 8, which explains the policy review schedule. And the main report starts in paragraph 9, where the reservist policy was an annual desktop review, and the two changes to that is to add in section 1, a confirmation that the policy doesn't replace any of the provisions of the SNCT Teacher's Handbook, and to update job titles and services following the Council's structure review in June. The next policy is early departure policy procedure. This was a full review, and this policy replaces our former redundancy policy and procedures and includes a range of voluntary options. There's no information being removed from the former redundancy policy, and we'd note the following changes, which are detailed in page 64 and over into 65. In summary, most of these changes are additions. There's updates where there's been changes to legislation since the last policy, but the main change is to embed our retirement options within this policy and enhance the information available to both employees and to managers when they're going through the process for further clarification. One of the changes that I would note across the page in top 65 is section 40.1 is the matrix used for voluntary severance and compulsory redundancy where necessary, and that's simply to change the costs where previously the policy had meant that the highest cost would have got a higher points. So we've changed that to make sure that in all occasions it's the most cost effective for the council. The other changes within that policy notes changes to the appendixes. Again, these are additions just for further clarity and explanation for individuals. The next policy is recruitment selection policy. It was an annual desktop review, and the main changes within it is the removal of the video technology. We still have the option to use video technology where it's felt necessary, but we had previously had it as a pilot in our application process, and this became a barrier for some individuals. We have made further clarification in relation to succession planning and clarification re-advertisement where necessary. There's been updates in legislation. We've included reference to ambassador recruitment with conviction, and that we advertise and right job for ex-service personnel, and we've updated the pre-employment checks. Carers leave policy was an annual desktop review, and similar to the reservist policy, the only changes was job titles and services in line with the current council structure, and the addition to the sentence about not replacing any of the SNCT Teacher's Handbook. Breastfeeding was a full review and has got the same two changes as the carers leave and the reservists. In addition, we have embedded the face qualities and behaviours. At paragraph 14, we make reference to SSC registration policy and procedure, which is due for review. However, the SSC are currently carrying out consultation in the register for a register for the future, and there may be legislative changes, so we have asked to postpone that at this point in time. Our trade union colleagues in paragraph 20 and 21 have been actively involved in the review of the policies, and all policies have been agreed by them. Quality impact assessment details are in paragraphs 23. There's no additional financial implications and no direct risk implications. Recommendations are laid out in paragraph 2, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. Any questions or comments? Okay, can we, Maureen?
Amanda, just at the top of page 65, in terms of cost effective for the council, I note that recently we have viewed a paper, and I need to be careful how I actually word this here. It certainly, some of the criteria within that paper was out with, I think, the timescales that we had previously in that policy. Is that something then that we have the potential to look at coming forward on a more regular basis with this change?
Through you, Chair. This change here is only about the matrix where we end up with compulsory redundancy. It would have a knock-on impact. So where previously the matrix and the scoring mechanism meant that the highest cost package would get the highest amount of points, so therefore would outweigh the lower cost packages. So that's been reversed. So that is completely separate to the other exception that you're making reference to.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Can we agree the recommendations? That's the end of the E items. Can I propose maybe a comfort break? We're back in 15 minutes, 10 minutes? 10 minutes, 20 past.
That's 9 minutes.